We have about 4.5 million people who have given us their symptoms across 3 countries, and we've linked these symptoms to whether they have a positive PCR test or not. And we have over 20 symptoms of COVID now. And so what we're finding is that we are finding rare symptoms that haven't been noticed before. And one of them is this painful mouth with ulcers, a painful tongue that gets little bits taken out of it called scalloping. And you can often have a furry coating of the tongue as well. And it seems to be associating with other symptoms of COVID as well. Sometimes the COVID rash, but often it occurs just after the first few classic symptoms of the condition. And it was ignored by most doctors, thinking it wasn't related. But now with all these increasing reports, it's looking like it's a part of this syndrome, and looks like some other conditions of the tongue that do get affected by viruses as well. And that's why it's also been called geographical tongue, because your tongue looks like a map of the world because of the way you have some bits that are raised and some bits that are lowered. It's still not common, so it's probably less than 1 in 100 people, but it may be more once people realize that it is associated, because generally when people are sick, they don't tend to take photos of their tongue. So maybe they will now, and people have been sending me on Twitter and by email pictures of their tongue, and it is now something we're asking routinely in our app. So I think it just tells people that there are many different symptoms of COVID, particularly in the first few days, that the medical community weren't recognizing, and that it really is essential. If something unusual happens, whether it's a skin rash or a painful tongue or some symptom you're really not expecting, while COVID is so common around in Europe, people should think this could be related to COVID and take the appropriate precautions. First, we have about 1.5 million people a day who are logging their symptoms on the app. And so what we do is we collect cases that have COVID tongue and see what proportion of them tested positive with a PCR test versus those that had COVID tongue and tested negative. Because in that way, it's only really useful if it is associated with a positive test rather than it being negative. And that's why common symptoms of COVID like headaches or fatigue, although they affect 80% of people with COVID, are also very common in people without COVID. And so they're not particularly useful. So that's what the next stage is to do the maths and see if having the COVID tongue really is a high predictor of having it rather than just being an occasional association. But I think it will show I think it will eventually be added to the list of symptoms.